Hello there, laddies. Ever read these books? Vinland Saga 1, 2, 4, and 3. Volumes 1, 3, 4, and 2. It's essentially a Japanese manga adaptation of the historical fictional saga called, the Vinland Saga, authored by Makoto Yukimura, who apparently took an interest in Viking history. You want to know a fun fact? I was introduced to this series by a friend in a Discord chat. When talking about good anime, he brought up one scene from the anime adaptation. The scene where the priest is talking about the real definition of love. That scene was so thought-provoking, it encouraged me to try to just engage with the rest of the series if I could. I had limited access to the rest of the anime adaptation because I didn't pay up for Amazon Prime membership. So I went to buying the manga books instead. And fortunately, just at the beginning of this month, well, the 7th of July to be precise, the Netflix dub of the Vinland Saga finally made its way to the UK on Netflix. And boy, do I have some things to tell you! This first season of the Vinland Saga is not only a very faithful adaptation of the source material, which in turn was a faithful adaptation to the historical fictional saga based on true historical events, but this anime is just so epic. I think I'm going to rank this among my top favorite anime series. That's right, Vinland Saga has earned its spot with these two beauties. Though, as an anime adaptation, the Vinland Saga does have a few flaws, but I'll get to them later. All you need to know is that you ought to take notes down when watching this series or reading the books. We're mainly talking about the anime series here, since the Vinland Saga is nothing short of epic, emotional, action-packed, deeply thought-provoking, beautifully stunning, shocking, and even deeply philosophical. And all in a way that still tells a cohesive story. All the characters, even the villains, have understandable motivation and such nuance to how they're presented. And the themes lend themselves well, not just for the sake of historical integrity, but also delving deeper into the story for its ultimate theme of trying to find paradise that might seem out of reach and may not even exist. And maybe it's too good to be true, and yet it's possible it could exist. And yet its existence is possible. And the story presents itself in a certain way that it can bring intrigue to, as well as challenge different belief systems, all in the pursuit of this paradise. But I think I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. What is the Vinland Saga all about? The story is centered on a young man named Thorfinn, the son of Thors, a former Viking warrior known as the Troll of Yom. Thors has settled down with his family, his son Thors, his daughter, and his wife Helga, as well as their friend Liep, and some other villagers, all settled in Iceland. It's there young Thorfinn is intrigued by Liep's stories about sailing out way into the west to find Vinland. Basically what they called America at the time. A rich land of vast, beautiful landscapes and rich crops and friendly natives, according to what Liep tells Thorfinn and the children. It's a land of peace where there's no slavery. There's plenty to eat, there's plenty to do, and it is peace. Basically heaven on earth. Thorfinn is eager to sail out into the seas and potentially find Vinland for himself. Thors is visited by some people from Thors' past, because apparently Thors had ran away from his Viking warfare to settle down with a family, something that his former Viking brethren did not approve of. So as Thors is invited out to the Faroe Islands by a man named Floki, Floki has hired a bunch of pirates led by the cunning, charismatic leader Askeladd to kill Thors. As Thorfinn sneaks aboard his father's ship, Thors, Liep, and Thorfinn, and some other young blokes, all get cornered by Askeladd and his men. After an intense duel between Thors and Askeladd, Askeladd has his pirate men kill Thors, which enrages Thorfinn enough to have him follow Askeladd and his men. Thorfinn is then hell-bent at a young age to kill Askeladd in an honorable duel to avenge his father's death. Askeladd agrees to these conditions, yet cunningly uses Thorfinn to do certain things for him to earn the right to do a duel. Thus Thorfinn becomes a spiteful servant of Askeladd and his men. 11 years pass, and Thorfinn has still yet to return home. and Askeladd and his men decide to take part in a crucial war that will determine the fate of Denmark and England, mainly because they want to get a bountiful reward from potentially rescuing Prince Canute, who shows a bit of promise for the throne of the Danish people. Battles are fought, ideologies clash, various characters get closer and closer towards their goals, but the further the story progresses, the more it's further implied that there's more to life than mere revenge and bloodlust, as various characters innately are seeking a paradise of peace. Can such a paradise be earned? Found? Is such a paradise possible? And through this, the story delves into even deeper questions, such as what are people even fighting for in the first place? Such as, what are you going to do when the path for vengeance comes to an end? How do you define love in the first place? The film portrays and depicts all of these questions with the audience engaging with the story, and it does so in a way that doesn't pander to anybody. The storytellers are clever enough to let the audience think for themselves. In fact, it's implied early on that certain characters have a lot more depth than they first appear, which leads me to another reason why I love this series so much. It's so well written. The writers clearly understand that the world is a complicated and messed up place as long as humans continue to inhabit it. So whilst all the characters can have their understandable motives, at the same time the story never shies away from any horrible acts any of the characters do during the story. In fact, for a story all about Vikings fighting each other, even though there are some spectacular action set pieces like with Thor versus Askeladd or Thorfinn versus Thorkel in a brilliantly well animated sequence, in other scenes, particularly during scenes where Vikings invade peaceful people, the show never glorifies the violence. In fact, it shows it for the gruesome nature that it is. Innocent people, peaceful loving people are being harmed. Men are being gruesomely tortured, the women are being severely harassed. And some characters people would deem heroic are in some ways responsible for such atrocities, which makes the tragedy go deeper. And some of the villainous characters, the types who would have no bother with harming peaceful people, can seem strangely virtuous at times during particular moments. And through these well-written characters interacting with each other, even though many of them are too distracted by warfare to bother sitting down with the big questions of life, at times characters will challenge each other with the big views on things, with the bigger picture. For example, characters like Willibald the Drunken Priest, Thors, and even Askeladd will criticize other characters for having such simple-minded goals that they can't seem to look past through. Or a character like the Prince, who starts off as a complete wimp but later on matures, but even then his maturation could potentially go into question given his newfound ambitions. And some characters will teach other characters lessons that they still can't seem to learn. They struggle to learn these lessons, and they seem to learn these lessons the hard way. Because at the face surface, you'd think this would be a typical Viking revenge story, similar to Roger Eggers' recent movie, The Northman. If you want to know about Viking culture, you could certainly watch The Northman, which could also serve as a potential origin for Shakespeare's Hamlet. Revenge stories have been seen all around ancient cultures for generations, as far back as Cain and Abel. And in terms of reaching out to the pop culture, the Viking revenge stories and Shakespeare's Hamlet really popularized the revenge stories. Yet in this particular Viking story, this story potentially commits Viking heresy by stating that there's more to life than revenge. These thought-provoking and challenging questions and ideologies are even more cemented due to the fact that this story is historically set in a time when Europe was transitioning from paganism to Christianity. So you have characters like the drunken priest Willibald trying to teach the concept of universal love to a bunch of brutal Vikings who only know about this selective love. So you'll have characters like Willibald trying to teach the concept of a universal agape love to Vikings who know nothing more than relationships that give them convenience for the battlefield. You'll have characters like Leif Erikson who seem to be embracing a bit of the old and the new. There are some, like Leif Erikson, who seems to be embracing a bit of both according to the Vinland Saga. And then you have Thors, who's trying to teach his son and perhaps other people that you have no enemies, and that a true warrior needs no sword. You probably won't notice this at first, but having read the manga prior to watching the anime series, it was intriguing to watch some same fight scenes, only this time to have some ideologies clash. It was intriguing to watch particular scenes of dialogue, confrontations, and fight scenes, and I'm noticing ideologies clashing together. Take the fight between Thors and Askeladd, for example. At this point, Thors has gained a reputation as a ferocious Viking warrior, and in that regard has earned Askeladd's respect. So much so, in fact, that Askeladd genuinely asks Thors if he could be the leader of the Viking pirates, to which Askeladd then passes off as a joke in front of his men. If you look at Askeladd's face and the way he's saying it, I don't think he was joking at all. And it's moments like these that really define who the characters really are. In the fight scene, you essentially have cunning and quick with Askeladd versus strong and experienced with Thors. Sometimes you get glimpses into how the characters think, as well as how they fight. And Thors could have easily have evaded the entire situation, but he put his sword down, and he sacrificed himself to save his own family and friends. There's other brilliant moments like this, and I think this story shines the best when these ideologies are put to the table, as it were. I think this story shines the best when these ideologies are on display. That's why I find characters like Willibald the Priest so intriguing. Willibald doesn't really get as much screen time as some of the other major characters, but with what little time he has, he manages to tell a thought-provoking philosophy, a video which I've already discussed the entire topic, by the way, in which Willibald is trying to explain love, and arguably exposes the root of human evil, in the fact that humans are prone to a very selective love, which isn't love at all. According to Willibald, people will deliberately choose to love those who will bring them convenience, but they won't love those who are an inconvenience. And when I was watching this anime, having read the manga before, something that caught my attention was the fact that Willibald is not a hypocrite in what he's talking about. He puts this into action. There's a particular scene in which he, alongside the Vikings that are accompanying Canute, approach this village full of peaceful people. Willibald goes out into the snowy blizzard and yells everyone in the villagers to run! And that gets him beaten up severely by Askeladd's men. Not too long afterwards, all the villagers are gathered to slaughter, so that there can be more resources for Askeladd and his men, and so that no one can tell where Prince Canute is currently located. Willibald the Priest watches at how the prince's guardian Ragnar is silent in not objecting to this slaughter. Willibald later brings this to Canute's attention and proclaims that Ragnar discriminated. Arguably, there's another villainous character, the king, who has a thought-provoking philosophy of his own, that the crown he wears has a will of its own, kind of like the ring in Lord of the Rings. Oh, just was wearing this t-shirt. You could pass that one off as, he's coming up with excuses, but when you think about it, people have to be very careful with what power they do have. With everything I'm saying, this is quite a very thought-provoking series. And it's elevated by the fact that this series is just so well written. And if anyone can testify and prove as to why this series is well written, look no further than the villain of the series, Askeladd. Yeah, you've probably heard it before if you've already seen a video essay or review or two online about the Vinland Saga, but everyone who's watched and reviewed the Vinland Saga, the story doesn't shy away from how much of a despicable person he is. Yet at the same time, there's this charm to him. He has this charisma in which you can understand why so many people would want to follow this man. He seems to have a deeper yearning for a more significant sense of meaning. He's smart and cunning in and outside the battlefield. He's quite a witty guy, and at times he showcases an innate yearning for this paradise that some of the other characters seem to be yearning for too. And with Thorfinn so fixated on revenge, Askeladd of all people teaches Thorfinn and tries to tell him that there's more to life than mere revenge, which in a very dark and twisted way makes Askeladd a father figure to Thorfinn. And without spoiling too much, there is another character who's closely related to a British legend, who plays a vital role in the final episode of the series. And you know what the most potentially mind-boggling aspect of this first season is? It's just the prologue! Yep, that's right, this entire epic prologue filled with so much intrigue, excellently written characters, thought-provoking philosophy, as well as beautiful animation, stunning visuals, brilliantly choreographed fight scenes, and so much deeply researched history. All that is just the prologue for an even bigger story. Vinland Saga Season 1 had pacing that was so great, it could be compared to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. The pacing is that good. There's some scenes where the CGI is a bit painstakingly obvious, but it blends well enough with the 2D animation that most people would just let it slide. Also, as excellent as this whole presentation is, there is a major problem with the way the show is presented. And that's mainly with the languages. You know, you got your characters who are speaking Danish, but then they're meant to be speaking to these French people who are... And then there's these English people as well. And then there's these Danish people who are speaking English, but what the audience is literally hearing is them all speaking the same language. So that can cause a bit of cognitive dissonance between what's going on in the story and the audience. I mean, would it not have hurt to apply a low logic and just let the different languages be represented by different accents? You know what? There ought to be this dub in which all the characters speak their languages accurately. Passion of the Christ style. How awesome would that be? So despite a few chinks in the series' armor, this really is an excellent series. As an adaptation, is it perfect? No. But as an adaptation, I was pleasantly surprised to see that there were a few additional scenes. And these new scenes actually made sense to the story. Maybe some of the small scenes didn't need to be there, but I suppose the entire series was rearranged a wee bit just to make more sense for the audience. This series is set in a more linear format compared to the manga series. So some small scenes such as Thorkel kidnapping the prince would make sense for the audience who are just getting into the series. What also makes sense to add into the story on a thematic level is to see how Thorfinn managed to acquire those knife skills and how he managed to live with Asgard and his men at such a young age all the way up to the age he is now. Those scenes made sense. And there was also an additional scene by the last 2 or so episodes in which Thorfinn gets himself in prison, but Leif manages to bail him out, and he re-establishes that hope for Vinland. I think that helps to solidify that sense of ultimate purpose that the series is trying to teach us about. And of course, re-establishes the title Vinland Saga. So these small scenes, they made sense to add in. What is the overall score I would give this first season? I think I'm going to give Vinland Saga Season 1, aka Prologue, probably a solid 11.3 out of 12, I think. I think maybe the openings and closings could have done with a slight change in their songs just to make it more appropriate for the historical period. But at this point, I think I'm just nitpicking. Honestly, go watch the Vinland Saga or read the manga if you haven't already. You'll thank me later. This is genuinely great storytelling up front, my friends. There are some things I forgot to mention. The music is quite provoking as well, and there's some moments where there's some epic orchestral pieces, yet there's other moments where you hear a piano, and the piano makes you just reminisce. I know the piano is probably inappropriate to the time period, but it's played in such a way where it makes you think. Like, some of the grandest moments in the series have piano music in the backdrop. Kind of reminiscent of the Studio Ghibli movies in some ways. As if this show wants to put more emphasis on those deeper callings, that immaterial part of us that yearns for something more. Also, here's a fun fact. I was talking about the Vinland Saga manga series with my uncle, who happens to have good knowledge on Viking history. As I was telling him about it, I was pleasantly surprised to hear that the Vinland Saga manga adaptation was quite accurate to the Vinland Saga. Although I will say this, you know how Braveheart was not historically accurate to the life of William Wallace? And the fact that Braveheart was actually an adaptation of a 14th century French poem? Vinland Saga, the anime series / manga series, is similar to that. Vinland Saga is an adaptation of a sort of romanticized interpretation of history. So make that out as you will. God bless you all. Scott Meyer signing out.